When I found the second cell phone hidden in Nathan's sock drawer, I knew his 5-month business trip to Austin wasn't about expanding our consulting firm. What I discovered next made me realize that sometimes the person sleeping next to you every night can be a complete stranger. My name is Claire Dawson, and this is the story of how I turned my husband's elaborate deception into the foundation of my freedom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Nathan left for what he called a, quote, crucial business expansion opportunity in Austin, I stood in our kitchen making his favorite breakfast one last time. Blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, the kind that cost $18 a bottle but made him smile like a kid on Christmas morning. He wrapped his arms around me from behind as I flipped the last pancake, his chin resting on my shoulder in that familiar way that once made my heart skip. 5 months is going to feel like forever, he murmured into my hair, his voice carrying what I believed was genuine regret. But this Austin project could change everything for us, Claire. When I get back, we'll finally have the capital to expand Dawson Design Studio the way you've always dreamed. I leaned back against his chest, letting myself believe in the future he painted with his words. Nathan had always been a dreamer, the kind of man who could make you see possibilities in empty spaces and abandoned buildings. It's what had drawn me to him 6 years earlier when we met at a home and garden expo in Portland. He was charming the socks off potential investors for his consulting firm, while I was showcasing my latest interior design project, a complete renovation of a 1920s craftsman home that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens. Promise me you'll call every night, I said, turning in his arms to face him. His green eyes, the color of sea glass in morning light, looked sincere as he cupped my face in his hands. Every single night, he promised, kissing my forehead with the kind of tenderness that made me feel cherished. This is our future, Claire. Trust me. Trust. That word would echo in my mind for months afterward, each repetition growing more bitter than the last. Nathan's departure felt different from his usual business trips. Those had been 3 or 4 days at most, quick jaunts to Seattle or San Francisco to meet with clients. This Austin venture was supposed to be comprehensive, setting up a satellite office, hiring local staff, establishing partnerships with Texas-based companies. The timeline made sense for such an ambitious expansion, and Nathan had shown me the preliminary contracts, the office lease agreements, even photos of the downtown Austin space he planned to rent. For the first month, everything proceeded exactly as he'd promised. He called every evening at 7 o'clock Portland time, always with stories about his day, challenges with local contractors, amusing encounters with Texas culture. He sent photos of his temporary apartment, a generic furnished place near the business district. He complained about the heat, the traffic, missing my cooking. Everything felt normal, even romantic in that long-distance way that makes ordinary phone conversations feel precious. I threw myself into my work during his absence, partly to distract from missing him, and partly because business was booming. Dawson Design Studio had built a reputation in Portland's competitive interior design market through word of mouth and social media presence. My specialty was transforming outdated spaces into modern, functional homes while preserving their original character. The before and after photos of my projects regularly went viral on Instagram, bringing in clients from as far away as Vancouver and San Francisco. The Riverside Mansion project consumed most of my attention that first month. Mrs. Chen, a tech executive who'd purchased a 1960s modernist home overlooking the Willamette River, wanted a complete transformation that honored the architectural bones while making the space livable for a family with 3 teenagers. The project required coordinating with structural engineers, custom furniture makers, and specialty contractors, exactly the kind of complex challenge that made me feel most alive professionally. During my lunch breaks, I'd call Nathan to update him on the project's progress. He seemed genuinely interested, asking detailed questions about the structural changes, the timeline for custom millwork, the challenges of working with the existing electrical systems. These conversations felt like the foundation of our partnership, 2 professionals supporting each other's ambitions, building something meaningful together. The first crack in this perfect facade appeared during the second month when I tried to surprise him with a care package. I'd assembled a collection of his favorite Oregon-made items: coffee from Stumptown, chocolates from Moonstruck, A bottle of Pinot Noir from a Willamette Valley winery we'd visited on our anniversary. When I called the shipping company Nathan had recommended, they had no record of his Austin address. "Are you sure you have the correct information?" the customer service representative asked. "We don't show any business or residential listings for that address in Austin." I double-checked the address Nathan had given me, reading each number and letter carefully. The representative tried several variations, searched by Nathan's name, even checked with their Austin distribution center. Nothing. The address simply didn't exist. When I confronted Nathan about it that evening, his explanation came smoothly, without hesitation. "Oh, Claire, I'm so sorry. I gave you the old address, the one we were considering, before we found the better location. The new office space came available suddenly, and in all the chaos of moving, I forgot to update you. Let me text you the correct address right now." The new address he provided worked perfectly when I called the shipping company back. The care package was delivered within 2 days, and Nathan called to thank me, describing each item with such enthusiasm that my suspicions melted away entirely. He even sent a photo of himself holding the wine bottle, standing in what appeared to be a modern office space with floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking back, I realized this was the moment when Nathan's deception shifted into high gear. Having successfully navigated the first test of his fictional narrative, he became more confident, more elaborate in his details. The stories he told became richer, more specific. He spoke about individual employees he was hiring, mentioned local restaurants he'd tried, even complained about a difficult landlord who was slow to fix the air conditioning in his apartment. The second month also brought an unexpected development in my own life. Marcus Thompson, a contractor I'd worked with on several high-end projects, approached me with an intriguing proposition. His company had been hired to renovate a historic hotel in downtown Portland, and the owners wanted an interior designer who could create a modern luxury experience while respecting the building's 1920s heritage. "This could be the project that puts Dawson Design Studio on the national map," Marcus explained as we walked through the empty hotel, our footsteps echoing in the grand lobby with its original terrazzo floors and ornate ceiling moldings. "The owners have connections to boutique hotel groups across the country. If we nail this, Claire, you could be looking at projects in New York, Los Angeles, Miami." The scope was enormous. 42 guest rooms, 3 restaurants, a rooftop bar, conference facilities, and a luxury spa. The budget was equally impressive, more than double anything I'd worked with before. But the timeline was aggressive. Everything needed to be completed within 8 months to meet the hotel's planned reopening date. "I'd need to bring on additional staff," I told Marcus, my mind already racing through the logistics. "Junior designers, project coordinators, maybe even a business manager to handle the increased administrative work." "The owners are prepared for that," he assured me. "They want the best, and they're willing to pay for it. The question is whether you're ready to take Dawson Design Studio to the next level." I was ready. More than ready. This was the opportunity Nathan and I had dreamed about, the kind of project that could transform my boutique design firm into a major player in the industry. When I called Nathan that evening to share the news, his excitement seemed genuine and immediate. "Claire, this is incredible. This is exactly what we've been working toward. You have to take it." His voice carried the kind of enthusiasm that made me fall in love with him in the first place. "I wish I could be there to celebrate with you properly, but I'll make it up to you when I get back. We'll plan something special, maybe that trip to Italy we've been talking about." With Nathan's encouragement, I accepted the hotel project and immediately began assembling the team I'd need. I hired 2 junior designers fresh out of design school, their portfolios full of innovative ideas and eagerness to prove themselves. I brought on Sarah Kim as a project coordinator, a detail-oriented professional who'd managed large-scale renovations for several Portland architecture firms. Most importantly, I hired Daniela Rodriguez as a business consultant to help me navigate the financial and legal complexities of such a large contract. Daniela had been my best friend since college, where we'd bonded over late-night study sessions and shared ambitions to build our own professional empires. She'd gone on to become a successful attorney specializing in business law, while I'd pursued my passion for design. Our friendship had weathered my marriage to Nathan, though I sometimes sensed Daniela's reservations about him. She never said anything directly, But I caught the slight pauses when I mentioned his name, the way her lawyer's instincts seemed to activate whenever we discussed his business ventures. "I'm proud of you for taking this leap," Daniela said as we reviewed the hotel contract in her downtown office. "But I want to make sure you're protected. This is a significant financial commitment, and you'll be personally liable for some substantial expenses. Have you discussed this with Nathan? How does this affect your joint financial planning?" The question caught me off guard. Nathan and I had always maintained somewhat separate finances, a decision that had seemed progressive and practical when we married. I managed my business accounts independently, while he handled his consulting firm and our shared household expenses. We'd never felt the need for detailed discussions about each other's business decisions. "Nathan's supportive," I assured her. "He's always encouraged me to grow the business. Besides, he's focused on his own expansion right now. This Austin project is consuming all his attention." Daniela nodded, but I noticed her making notes on a legal pad. "I'd still recommend having a conversation about how this affects your overall financial picture. Projects this size can have unexpected ripple effects, especially if you're both making major business investments simultaneously." Her advice was sound, but Nathan and I had never been the type of couple to micromanage each other's professional decisions. Our marriage worked because we trusted each other's judgment, supported each other's ambitions, without trying to control them. The independence we maintained in our careers felt like strength, not weakness.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The hotel project consumed my days and invaded my dreams. I spent hours researching period-appropriate materials, meeting with artisans who could recreate the intricate plasterwork damaged in a 1980s renovation, sourcing vintage-inspired fixtures that could accommodate modern electrical systems. Every detail had to balance historical authenticity with contemporary luxury, creating spaces that felt both timeless and thoroughly modern. My evening phone calls with Nathan became increasingly precious, the one constant in days that stretched well past normal business hours. He seemed fascinated by the project's complexity, asking thoughtful questions about my design choices, the challenges of historic preservation, the personalities of my new team members. These conversations made me feel connected to him, despite the physical distance, as if we were building something together even while apart. It was during one of these late-night calls, about 10 weeks into his Austin trip, that I first heard something that made me pause. Nathan was describing a dinner meeting with potential local partners when I heard laughter in the background, distinctly feminine laughter, followed by what sounded like a woman's voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Oh, just the server," Nathan replied without missing a beat. "This restaurant has a really friendly staff. Very chatty. You know how Texans are. Everyone wants to be your best friend." The explanation was perfectly reasonable, but something in his voice had changed. A slight tightness, as if he was concentrating harder than usual on his words. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of my own project was making me imagine problems where none existed. But over the next few weeks, I began noticing other small inconsistencies. Nathan mentioned attending a baseball game on a night when I later discovered the local team was playing out of town. He described a restaurant that, when I looked it up online, had been closed for renovations for the past month. He complained about rain on days when weather websites showed clear skies in Austin. Each discrepancy was minor, easily explained by simple mistakes or faulty memory. But they began accumulating in my mind like drops of water wearing away a stone. I found myself taking notes during our conversations, not intentionally at first, but because I was working on multiple projects simultaneously and had developed a habit of jotting down details from every phone call. The pattern became undeniable when I realized Nathan had told me 3 different stories about the same supposed business meeting, each version featuring different people, different outcomes, different restaurants. When I gently questioned him about the inconsistencies, his explanations became more elaborate, more defensive. "Claire, I'm juggling a dozen different deals here," he said, his voice carrying an edge of irritation I rarely heard. "I'm sorry if I'm mixing up some details, but I'm under incredible pressure. I thought you'd understand that, given what you're dealing with your own project." His response was calculated to make me feel guilty for questioning him, and it worked. I apologized for being nitpicky, blamed my own stress for making me paranoid. But privately, I began paying closer attention to everything he told me, and the inconsistencies only multiplied. By the third month, I was certain Nathan was lying about something, but I couldn't determine what or why. His explanations for every discrepancy were plausible, delivered with such confidence that I began to doubt my own perceptions. Maybe I was remembering things incorrectly. Maybe the stress of the hotel project was affecting my judgment. Maybe long-distance relationships just naturally created misunderstandings and confusion. The breakthrough came entirely by accident during a video call with my sister Emma, who lived in Austin. She'd moved there 2 years earlier for a job with a non-profit organization, and had fallen in love with the city's music scene and food culture. We'd been trying to coordinate schedules for a call for weeks, and when we finally connected, she was walking through downtown Austin during her lunch break. "I've been meaning to ask," she said as she navigated the sidewalk, her phone's camera showing glimpses of the cityscape behind her. "Nathan's been in town for months now, right? I keep thinking we should all get together for dinner, but every time I remember to text you about it, it's already late in Portland. Maybe next time I should just call him directly. What's his number here?" The question hit me like ice water. In all our conversations about his Austin experience, Nathan had never once mentioned wanting to see Emma. Never suggested we arrange a meeting between them. For a man who claimed to be lonely and missing Portland connections, his complete lack of interest in spending time with my sister was suddenly glaring. "Actually," I said carefully, "Nathan's been so busy with work stuff, I'm not sure he'd have time for socializing. His schedule has been pretty intense." Emma's expression grew curious. "Really? Austin's not that big a city, and I'm downtown all the time for work meetings. I'm surprised I haven't run into him randomly. What part of town is his office in?" I gave her the address Nathan had provided, watching her face as she oriented herself geographically. "That's weird," she said, pausing her walk to think. "That whole block is still under construction. Has been for months. They're putting up a new high-rise, but it won't be finished until next year. Are you sure that's the right address?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Maybe I wrote it down wrong. You know how I am with addresses. I'll double-check with him and text you the correct information." After we hung up, I sat in my home office staring at the address Nathan had given me, the same address where I'd successfully shipped his care package. Either Emma was mistaken about the construction, or Nathan had somehow arranged for mail delivery to a non-existent office building. Neither possibility made sense. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching the address online, using every tool I could think of. Property records, business directories, street view images from multiple mapping services. Emma was right. The entire block was under construction, had been for over a year. No businesses were operating from that location. No mail delivery was possible. When Nathan called that evening at his usual time, I was ready. "Hey, honey, Emma mentioned she'd love to meet up with you for dinner sometime. I was thinking maybe this weekend? She knows some great restaurants downtown." "Oh, that's sweet of her," Nathan replied smoothly. "But this weekend is absolutely packed for me. We're at a critical phase with the lease negotiations, and I'll probably be working late every night. Maybe in a few weeks when things calm down." "Of course," I said, making notes on the pad beside my phone. She was asking about your office location, too. I think I gave her the wrong address. You know how terrible I am with numbers? What was that street address again? He repeated the same address he'd given me months earlier, the address that didn't exist. "It's in a newer building," he added, kind of tucked away, so it's not surprising she hasn't noticed it. After we said goodbye, I sat in the growing darkness of my office, listening to the familiar sounds of our neighborhood settling into evening. Dog walkers passing on the sidewalk, the distant hum of traffic from the main arterial, the neighbors' wind chimes responding to the October breeze. Everything felt normal and peaceful, while inside my chest, my heart was hammering with the recognition that my husband was living an elaborate lie. The question was no longer whether Nathan was deceiving me, but what he was hiding and why. The careful construction of his fictional Austin life suggested planning and intention far beyond a simple affair or business failure. This was something bigger, something that required months of sustained deception and extraordinary attention to detail. I needed proof before I could confront him, evidence that couldn't be explained away with more lies. And for the first time since he'd left for Austin, I began to consider the possibility that the man I'd loved and trusted for 6 years might be someone I didn't know at all. The next morning, I canceled all my client appointments and drove to the Portland Public Library's Central Branch. If Nathan was going to lie to me, I needed to become very good at uncovering the truth. The library's computer terminals offered something my home internet didn't: complete anonymity and access to databases that might leave digital footprints I preferred to avoid. I started with the basics, searching property records for the address Nathan had given me in Austin. The city's online portal confirmed what Emma had told me. The entire block was designated as an active construction zone, with no certificate of occupancy issued for any building at that address. The construction permits showed a timeline extending into late next year, meaning Nathan's supposed office had never existed. But the care package I'd sent had been delivered successfully. Someone had signed for it, someone using Nathan's name. I pulled up the shipping company's tracking information, studying the delivery confirmation details I'd initially overlooked. The signature was illegible, typical for package deliveries, but the timestamp showed it had been received at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, during what should have been normal business hours. I created a systematic approach to investigating Nathan's claims, opening a new email account under a false name, and methodically fact-checking every detail he'd shared about his Austin life. The restaurants he'd mentioned visiting, the landmarks he'd described, the weather patterns he'd complained about, everything could be verified through online sources. What I discovered was both impressive and terrifying in its thoroughness. Nathan's lies weren't random or spontaneous. They were carefully researched, consistent with publicly available information about Austin. When he complained about rain, it had indeed rained in Austin that day. When he mentioned trying a new restaurant, it was a real establishment with good online reviews. When he described traffic delays, they correlated with actual construction projects reported in local news sources. This wasn't someone making careless mistakes or telling impulsive lies. This was someone who had created an entirely fictional narrative and was maintaining it with meticulous attention to detail. The level of planning required suggested this deception had been in the works long before Nathan announced his business trip. I spent 3 hours at the library, printing out property records, business registrations, and maps. By the time I left, I had assembled a file that definitively proved Nathan's Austin story was fabricated. But I still had no idea where he actually was or what he was really doing. That evening, when Nathan called at his usual time, I was ready with a different strategy. Instead of challenging his story directly, I began fishing for information that might reveal his true location. "How's the weather been?" I asked casually. "It's been so gray and rainy here lately. I'm jealous of all that Texas sunshine you keep talking about." "Actually, it's been pretty overcast here too," Nathan replied. "Weird for October, but I guess even Austin gets gloomy sometimes." I was looking at the weather report for Austin as he spoke. Clear skies, 78 degrees, no precipitation in the forecast for the entire week. But Portland had indeed been gray and rainy for 3 straight days. Nathan was describing Portland weather while claiming to be in Austin. "That's too bad," I said, making notes. "I was hoping you were getting some vitamin D down there. Have you had a chance to check out any of those food trucks Emma recommended?" There was a slight pause before Nathan responded. "Which food trucks?" "I don't think Emma gave me any recommendations." "Really?" "She mentioned them when we talked yesterday. The ones near your office building. She said they have amazing breakfast tacos." I was lying completely, testing whether Nathan would admit to not knowing the area or create another fictional story. "Oh, right, those food trucks," Nathan said, his voice gaining confidence as he improvised. "Yeah, I've been meaning to try them, but my schedule has been so crazy. Maybe next week, when things calm down." I was simultaneously amazed and disgusted by how easily the lies came to him. Nathan had never struggled with quick thinking. It was one of the qualities that made him successful in business, but watching him deploy that skill to deceive me felt like discovering a stranger wearing my husband's voice. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my growing file of evidence, trying to understand what I was dealing with. Nathan wasn't just hiding an affair or a business failure. He had constructed an elaborate alternate reality that required constant maintenance and incredible attention to detail. The question that kept circling through my mind was why someone would go to such extreme lengths to disguise their whereabouts. The answer came to me gradually over the next few days as I continued my investigation. If Nathan wasn't in Austin, and if he wasn't maintaining an office there, then the entire business expansion story was fictional, which meant the money he'd supposedly invested in the Austin venture, money from our joint savings account, had gone somewhere else entirely. I had never paid close attention to our household finances. Nathan handled the mortgage, utilities, and shared expenses, while I managed my business accounts independently. It had seemed like a fair division of labor, especially since his income was more stable than mine, which fluctuated based on project schedules. But now I realized this arrangement had created a blind spot I could no longer afford. Accessing our joint accounts required Nathan's password, which I'd never needed before. But I knew Nathan's patterns, his tendency to use variations of meaningful dates and names. After several failed attempts, I tried the date we'd met followed by the name of his childhood dog. The account opened immediately. What I found made my hands shake as I scrolled through the transaction history. Over the past 6 months, Nathan had been systematically draining our savings. Large withdrawals, always in round numbers, always transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The pattern had started small, $5,000 here, $3,000 there, but had accelerated dramatically in the weeks before his departure for Austin. The most recent withdrawal had been made just 2 days earlier. $15,000, transferred to the same mysterious account that had received all the other funds. In total, Nathan had moved nearly $80,000 out of our joint savings without my knowledge or consent. I printed out the bank statements, my printer working overtime, as months of transactions materialized on paper. Each page felt like evidence of a crime, proof that the man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years had been systematically robbing me while planning his elaborate disappearance. But where was the money going? And more importantly, where was Nathan? The mystery account number meant nothing to me, but I suspected Daniela might know how to trace it. I called her office and scheduled an emergency meeting, claiming I needed legal advice about a business matter. It wasn't entirely a lie. Nathan's theft from our joint account was certainly a business matter now. Daniela's office occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city and mountains beyond. She'd built her practice representing small businesses and entrepreneurs, earning a reputation for fierce advocacy and creative problem-solving. Her success was evident in every detail of the office, from the custom furniture to the original artwork adorning the walls. "Claire, you look terrible," Daniela said the moment I walked into her office. "And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it as a friend who's concerned. What's going on?" I spread the bank statements across her conference table, like tarot cards revealing an unwanted future. "I need you to help me understand what Nathan has been doing with our money. And I need you to help me figure out where he really is, because he's definitely not in Austin." Daniela's expression shifted from concern to professional focus as I explained everything I'd discovered. She took notes in her precise handwriting, asking clarifying questions, requesting specific dates and amounts. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair with the look of someone who'd heard similar stories before. "Claire, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly, even if the answers are uncomfortable," she said. "How well do you really know Nathan's business? Have you ever seen his client contracts, his financial statements, his tax returns?" The questions made me squirm with embarrassment. We've always kept our finances separate. I trusted him to handle his business, and he trusted me to handle mine. It never seemed necessary to dig into the details. "What about joint assets, the house, investments, retirement accounts?" "Everything is in both our names," I said, though even as I spoke, I realized I was making assumptions based on what Nathan had told me, rather than what I'd verified myself. Daniela made more notes. "I'm going to need you to gather every financial document you can find. Bank statements for all accounts, credit card statements, mortgage documents, insurance policies, tax returns for the past 3 years. Also, I want you to pull your credit report to make sure there aren't any accounts or debts you don't know about. The idea that Nathan might have opened accounts or taken on debt in my name without my knowledge had never occurred to me. Marriage had always felt like partnership, not a vulnerability to be exploited. But sitting in Daniela's office, surrounded by evidence of Nathan's deception, I began to understand how naive I'd been. There's something else, Daniela continued. The pattern of withdrawals you've shown me suggests Nathan has been planning this for a long time. People don't just decide to steal $80,000 and disappear on a whim. This kind of systematic deception usually means there's something bigger at stake. Like what? Debt, gambling, another woman, business failure, legal problems, any number of things that might require significant cash and the need to disappear quietly. Daniela's expression was gentle but serious. Claire, I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Nathan isn't coming back from Austin, because Nathan was never in Austin to begin with. The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd been moving toward the same conclusion myself. Hearing it stated so directly by someone whose judgment I trusted made it impossible to deny or rationalize away. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. First, we protect you legally and financially. We change passwords on all your accounts, we document everything Nathan has taken, and we start the process of separating your assets from his. Then we figure out where he really is and what he's really been doing. Daniela walked me through the immediate steps I needed to take, her calm professionalism providing an anchor in what felt like a completely chaotic situation. Change passwords, contact banks, secure important documents. Avoid doing anything that might tip Nathan off to my investigation until we had a complete picture of the situation. Most importantly, she said as our meeting concluded, don't let him know you're suspicious when he calls tonight. We need time to build our case before he realizes you're onto him. That evening's phone call with Nathan was the most difficult conversation of my marriage. Knowing what I now knew about his lies and theft, every word he spoke felt like another small betrayal. He chatted about his fictional day, described a lunch meeting that had never happened, complained about weather in a city where he wasn't living. I miss you so much, he said toward the end of our call, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine emotion. This separation is harder than I expected. I can't wait to get home and start our new life together. New life. The phrase felt loaded with meaning I couldn't yet decipher. What kind of new life was Nathan planning? And did it include me at all? After we hung up, I walked through our house with fresh eyes, looking for clues I might have missed. Nathan's home office, which I'd always respected as his private workspace, now felt like a crime scene waiting to be processed. But I needed to be careful. If Nathan was monitoring our joint accounts, he might also be monitoring other things. Email, phone records, even security cameras. I started with the least obvious places, areas where Nathan might have hidden documents or evidence without thinking I'd ever look. The back of his filing cabinet yielded nothing unusual, just old tax returns and insurance policies. His dresser drawers contained only clothes and the usual collection of miscellaneous items that accumulate over time. But when I moved to his nightstand, I found something that made my heart race. Tucked behind a stack of unread magazines was a prepaid cell phone I'd never seen before. The phone was turned off, but when I powered it on, it immediately began receiving text messages. The messages were from someone named Isabel, and they painted a picture that made my investigation suddenly much more urgent. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, read the most recent message. The contractors finished the kitchen renovation. The house looks amazing. House. Kitchen renovation. Nathan wasn't just having an affair. He was building a life with someone else, using our money to finance it. I scrolled through the message history with shaking hands, my marriage disintegrating with each new revelation. Photos of a house I'd never seen, discussions of furniture purchases, plans for dinner parties with friends I'd never met. Nathan had been living a double life for months, possibly years, while I'd been faithfully waiting at home, planning our future together. The messages revealed that Nathan and Isabel were living together in what appeared to be a newly renovated home somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. The photos showed a modern kitchen with custom cabinets, granite countertops, and high-end appliances. Exactly the kind of renovation that would cost the amount of money Nathan had stolen from our accounts. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. As I continued scrolling through the messages, I found a conversation from 3 weeks earlier that stopped my heart completely. "The divorce papers are ready," Isabel had written. "My lawyer says once Claire signs them, we'll be free to get married without any complications. Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Nathan's response was clinical in its coldness. "Claire is completely focused on her hotel project. She barely notices anything else right now. The timing couldn't be better. By the time she realizes what's happening, everything will be finalized." They were planning to divorce me without my knowledge, using my distraction with work as cover for their scheme. The Austin business trip wasn't just a cover for Nathan's affair. It was a strategic move designed to separate us physically and emotionally, while he arranged the legal end of our marriage. I took photos of every message, every image, every piece of evidence I could find on the phone. Then I turned it off and returned it to exactly where I'd found it, my hands trembling with adrenaline and rage. The scope of Nathan's betrayal was staggering. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a gradual drift away from our marriage. This was a calculated dismantling of our life together, executed with the same methodical precision Nathan brought to his business dealings. He had been planning this for months, possibly years, while continuing to share our bed, eat meals I prepared, and discuss our future, as if he had any intention of honoring the promises he'd made to me. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything I discovered, creating files of evidence that Daniela could use to protect me legally. The hotel project that had consumed my attention for months suddenly felt like a distraction from the real crisis in my life. While I'd been building my career, Nathan had been systematically destroying our marriage and stealing our shared assets to fund his new life with another woman. But two could play at the game of strategic planning. If Nathan thought he could manipulate me into signing divorce papers without understanding what I was giving up, he had severely underestimated the woman he'd married. I'd built a successful business from nothing, managed complex projects with demanding clients, and navigated the competitive world of high-end interior design. Outmaneuvering a lying, cheating husband was just another project to be completed with excellence. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, and spent the day assembling my case against Nathan. I gathered every financial document I could find, pulled my credit report, and discovered 2 credit cards I'd never applied for, but which listed me as an authorized user. Both cards had significant balances, nearly $20,000 total, for purchases I'd never made. Nathan had been using my credit without my knowledge, another layer of financial theft that made my situation even more precarious. The charges were for furniture, appliances, and home improvement supplies, all consistent with the kitchen renovation photos I'd seen on his secret phone. I called Daniela with an update, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the magnitude of what I was reporting. "It's worse than we thought," I told her. "He's not just planning to leave me, he's planning to bankrupt me in the process." "Bring everything to my office this afternoon," Daniela replied. "And Claire? Don't feel guilty about what you're about to do. Nathan made his choices. Now it's time for you to make yours." That afternoon, sitting in Daniela's conference room surrounded by evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal, I began planning my response. Nathan had spent months constructing an elaborate deception designed to leave me financially ruined and emotionally devastated. He'd stolen our money, damaged my credit, and planned to trick me into signing away my rights in our divorce. But Nathan had made one crucial mistake in his careful planning. He'd underestimated me completely, assuming I would remain the trusting, distracted wife who never questioned his stories or examined his actions too closely. He'd built his entire scheme on the assumption that I would never fight back. It was time to prove him wrong. The private investigator's office occupied a nondescript building in southeast Portland, the kind of place you might walk past 100 times without noticing. Helen Carter had come highly recommended by Daniela, with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness that made her the go-to choice for attorneys handling complex domestic cases. Helen was nothing like the private investigators I'd seen in movies. She was a former police detective in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every variation of human deception. Her office was sparse but organized, with filing cabinets that looked like they contained 1,000 secrets and a coffee maker that appeared to work overtime. "Your husband is good," Helen said, after reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. This level of systematic deception requires real skill and planning. Most cheating spouses are sloppy, emotional, prone to mistakes. Nathan's approach is almost professional. The word professional sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean by professional? I mean, this isn't his first time orchestrating something like this. The attention to detail, the consistent backstory, the financial maneuvering. These are learned behaviors. Either Nathan has experience with deception, or he's getting advice from someone who does. Helen spread out a map of the Pacific Northwest, marking potential locations where Nathan might actually be living. Based on the timing of his phone calls and the weather patterns he's been describing, I'd guess he's within a few hours of Portland. Close enough to maintain his regular schedule, far enough to avoid accidental encounters. What about Isabel? I asked. Can you find out who she is? Already started, Helen replied, pulling out a tablet and showing me a social media profile. Isabel Monroe, 32 years old, real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. Based in Bend, Oregon. Very active on Instagram, lots of photos of beautiful homes and outdoor adventures. The photos made my stomach clench. Isabel was stunning in that effortless way some women achieved, with long blonde hair and the kind of athletic build that suggested expensive gym memberships and personal trainers. But what hurt more than her appearance was the obvious happiness in her photos. The radiant smile of someone whose life was going exactly according to plan. Look at the dates on these posts, Helen continued, scrolling through Isabel's Instagram feed. She's been posting photos of home renovation projects for the past 8 months. Kitchen remodels, bathroom updates, landscaping work. The timeline matches perfectly with Nathan's withdrawals from your joint account. I studied the images with a designer's eye, recognizing expensive finishes and custom work that would cost exactly the amount Nathan had stolen from our savings. Each photo felt like a slap in the face, evidence of the life he'd been building with my money while lying to me about his whereabouts. There's more, Helen said, her voice gentler now. Isabel has been posting about her relationship since last spring. No photos of Nathan directly, but references to starting fresh with the love of my life and building our dream home together. She's been completely open about the relationship on social media. The casualness of it was devastating. While I'd been carefully guarding our privacy, respecting Nathan's preference for keeping personal matters off social media, his girlfriend had been documenting their entire relationship online. She'd been celebrating their love publicly while I remained a secret, hidden away like something shameful. I need to know where they're living, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to know exactly what Nathan has been doing with our money. I can get you that information, Helen assured me, but first, we need to talk about what you plan to do with it. Knowledge is power, but it's also evidence. Once we start documenting Nathan's activities directly, there's no going back to pretending you don't know. I thought about the hotel project consuming my days, the staff I'd hired who depended on my leadership, the clients who trusted me to deliver their vision. Part of me wanted to retreat into that familiar world, to focus on work and pretend my personal life wasn't imploding. But Nathan had made that impossible when he decided to steal our money and plan my financial ruin. I want to know everything, I told Helen. And then I want to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done. Helen nodded approvingly. Good. Victims who fight back have much better outcomes than those who just accept the situation. Give me a week, and I'll have a complete picture of Nathan's activities. That week was the longest of my life. I maintained my normal routine, managing the hotel project during the day and taking Nathan's nightly phone calls with increasingly difficult composure. Each conversation felt like a performance, pretending to be the trusting wife while knowing exactly what he was hiding from me. Nathan's lies had become more elaborate as his confidence grew. He described elaborate business dinners that never happened, complained about weather in a city where he wasn't living, and shared anecdotes about local Austin culture he was researching online. The effort required to maintain such an extensive fiction was impressive in its own twisted way. During one particularly painful call, Nathan launched into a detailed story about touring potential office spaces with a local real estate agent. He described the agent's appearance, her personality, her recommendations for the best neighborhood to establish his business. The level of detail was convincing, would have been completely believable, if I hadn't known he was actually living with a real estate agent in Bend. That sounds promising, I said, taking notes as he spoke. What was the agent's name? Maybe I could look up her company online, get a sense of the local market. There was the briefest pause before Nathan responded. Actually, I don't think I caught her name. Everything was handled through the property management company. Very professional, but not particularly personal. Another lie to cover the previous lies, each deception requiring additional fabrications to maintain the illusion. I wondered how Nathan kept track of all the stories he'd told me, whether he maintained notes or relied on his memory to keep the details consistent. Work provided a refuge from the stress of my crumbling marriage. The hotel project had reached the critical phase, where all the planning and design work began translating into physical reality. Contractors were installing custom millwork, artisans were restoring original plasterwork, and the spaces I'd envisioned on paper were finally taking shape. Marcus Thompson had become more than just a contractor during the project. He'd become a trusted collaborator who understood my vision and found ways to execute even the most challenging design elements. His crew worked with the precision and attention to detail that separated excellent renovations from mediocre ones. "You've been distracted lately," Marcus observed during one of our daily walkthroughs. "Everything okay?" The stress of a project this size can be overwhelming. I appreciated his concern, but couldn't bring myself to share the details of my personal crisis. "Just some family stuff," I said, which was technically true if you considered discovering your husband's systematic betrayal a family matter. "Well, whatever's going on, don't let it derail what you've accomplished here," Marcus said, gesturing at the transformed lobby around us. "This project is going to change everything for your business. Don't let outside problems steal your focus from that." His words reminded me of something I'd been trying not to think about: what Nathan's theft and deception meant for my business future. The hotel project represented my biggest opportunity, but it also required significant cash flow to cover expenses before payments arrived. If Nathan had damaged my credit or created debts I didn't know about, my ability to complete the project could be compromised. That evening, I called Daniela with a new worry. What happens to my business if Nathan has created financial problems I don't know about yet? This hotel project is the biggest thing I've ever attempted. If there are credit issues or hidden debts, I could lose everything. "That's exactly why we're moving quickly to separate your assets from his," Daniela replied. "But you're right to be concerned. We need to do a complete audit of your financial situation and make sure there aren't any time bombs waiting to explode." The next morning brought Helen's preliminary report, delivered to Daniela's office with the clinical precision of a medical diagnosis. Nathan and Isabel were indeed living together in a renovated craftsman home in Bend, Oregon. The property had been purchased 8 months earlier using a combination of cash and financing that matched the timeline of Nathan's systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts. The down payment alone was $60,000, Helen explained, showing me property records and mortgage documents. All of it traced back to transfers from accounts Nathan shared with you. Essentially, he used your money to buy a house with another woman. The photographs Helen had taken during surveillance were devastating in their mundane intimacy. Nathan and Isabel grocery shopping together, walking their dog through a neighborhood park, hosting barbecues with friends I'd never met. He looked relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if the stress of maintaining his double life had been worth it for this new relationship. "There's more," Helen continued. "Nathan has been establishing residency in Oregon using the Bend address. He's changed his voter registration, updated his driver's license, and opened new bank accounts at a local credit union. This isn't a temporary arrangement. He's permanently relocating his life." The evidence painted a picture of careful planning that extended far beyond a simple affair. Nathan had been methodically transferring not just his money but his entire identity to this new life, erasing his connection to me systematically and permanently. "What about his business?" I asked. "His consulting firm, the clients he's supposedly serving in Austin?" "That's where it gets interesting," Helen replied. Nathan's consulting business appears to be largely fictional. He maintains a website and business registration, but there's no evidence of actual clients or revenue. The few legitimate contracts I found are old, dating back over a year. The revelation that Nathan's business was essentially a front operation was somehow more shocking than discovering his affair. Our entire financial planning had been based on his supposed income from consulting work. If that income didn't exist, then our lifestyle had been funded entirely by draining savings and accumulating debt. How long has this been going on? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Based on the financial records, Nathan's business income dropped to almost nothing about 18 months ago. Since then, he's been maintaining your household expenses by gradually liquidating assets and using credit. The Austin trip was his exit strategy, a way to disappear while making it look like he was pursuing new opportunities. I sat in stunned silence, processing the scope of Nathan's deception. For over a year, he'd been living a complete lie while planning his escape from our marriage. Every conversation about our future had been meaningless theater, performed for my benefit while he arranged his new life with someone else. Daniela spread the divorce papers Nathan and Isabel had prepared across her conference table. These documents are designed to leave you with essentially nothing, she explained. They claim all business assets belong to Nathan individually, designate your house as his separate property, and assign all joint debts to you personally. The papers were a masterpiece of legal manipulation, crafted to give Nathan everything while saddling me with responsibility for debts I hadn't incurred. If I'd signed them without understanding their contents, I would have emerged from my marriage financially ruined while Nathan started fresh with Isabel and the assets he'd stolen. But here's the good news, Daniela continued. Nathan's own actions have given us everything we need to fight back. The financial documentation, the evidence of asset hiding, the proof of his systematic deception, it all works in our favor. Over the next hour, Daniela outlined a strategy that would turn Nathan's careful planning against him. Instead of confronting him directly, or trying to negotiate, we would use his own timeline against him. Nathan expected me to remain oblivious until he was ready to reveal his deception on his terms. Instead, we would control the timing and circumstances of that revelation. The key is patience, Daniela explained. Nathan thinks he's several moves ahead of you, but he's actually walking into a trap of his own making. Every day he continues this charade, every dollar he spends on his new life, every lie he tells you, it all strengthens our case. I left Daniela's office with a strategy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. For months, I'd been the victim of Nathan's manipulation, dancing to a script I didn't know existed. Now I would become the choreographer, orchestrating a response that would expose his deception and protect my interests. The transformation began immediately. That evening, when Nathan called for our nightly conversation, I was ready with a performance of my own. Instead of the slightly suspicious wife I'd been lately, I became the loving, trusting partner he expected me to be. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, I told him, injecting warmth into my voice. About our future together, what we want to build when you get back from Austin. I'm so proud of what you're accomplishing down there. Really? Nathan's voice carried surprise and relief. I was worried you'd been feeling disconnected lately. I know this separation has been hard on both of us. It has been hard, I agreed. But it's also made me realize how much I value what we have together. I want to support your business expansion completely. Maybe I should fly down to Austin for a weekend visit. I'd love to see what you're building. The silence on Nathan's end stretched long enough for me to count my heartbeats. When he finally responded, his voice carried a tension I'd never heard before. That's incredibly sweet, Claire, but the timing isn't great right now. We're in the middle of some really sensitive negotiations, and having anyone not directly involved in the business could complicate things. But soon, I promise. Maybe once we're closer to finalizing everything. Of course, I said understandingly. I don't want to interfere with your work. I just miss you so much. I miss you too, Nathan replied, his voice softening. More than you know. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. The sadness came from recognizing how easily Nathan lied to me, how naturally the deception flowed from him. But the satisfaction came from knowing that his lies were now working in my favor, giving me time to prepare while he remained confident in his control over the situation. The next few days passed in a surreal blur of normal life, shadowed by secret preparation. I continued managing the hotel project, attended client meetings, and supervised the installation of custom fixtures. To everyone around me, I appeared to be the same successful designer focused on delivering an exceptional project. Only Daniela and Helen knew that I was simultaneously orchestrating a response to my husband's betrayal. The hotel's grand staircase installation provided a metaphor that wasn't lost on me. The original 1920s staircase had been damaged by decades of neglect and poor renovation attempts. Instead of replacing it entirely, we'd carefully restored each element, reinforcing the structure while preserving its original character. The process required patience, expertise, and attention to detail, exactly the qualities I was applying to reconstructing my own life. Nathan's nightly phone calls continued, each conversation adding to my collection of recorded lies. Oregon law allowed me to record phone conversations as long as one party consented, and my lawyer had advised me to document Nathan's continued deception. Each call provided more evidence of his systematic fraud and more ammunition for the legal battle ahead. During one particularly elaborate conversation, Nathan described a weekend trip to San Antonio he'd supposedly taken with potential business partners. He painted a vivid picture of the Riverwalk, the historic missions, the legendary barbecue restaurants he'd tried. His descriptions were so detailed and enthusiastic that I almost believed them myself. But I was looking at Isabel's Instagram feed as he spoke, watching her post real-time photos from a weekend hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains. Nathan was describing Texas landmarks while actually climbing Oregon peaks with his girlfriend, each lie becoming more preposterous as his confidence grew. That sounds amazing, I told him. San Antonio has always been on my travel wish list. Maybe we could go back there together sometime, after your project wraps up. Absolutely, Nathan agreed enthusiastically. I'd love to show you all the places I discovered. There's this little restaurant near the Riverwalk that serves the most incredible mole sauce. You'd love the atmosphere. I made notes as he spoke, adding his fictional San Antonio adventure to the growing file of documented lies. Each fabrication was another nail in the coffin of his credibility, more evidence that could be used to demonstrate his systematic deception in divorce proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on me that Nathan's skill at creating detailed fiction, the same talent that had made him successful in business, was now providing the evidence needed to destroy his case in court. His perfectionist nature, which had once been an asset, was becoming his greatest liability as he created an increasingly elaborate web of lies that could never be sustained under legal scrutiny. 2 weeks into my secret investigation, Helen called with news that changed everything. Nathan's timeline is accelerating, she reported. He's scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney next week, and Isabel has been posting about exciting news coming soon on social media. I think they're preparing to serve you with papers. The revelation that Nathan was moving faster than expected sent adrenaline coursing through my system. Our strategy had been based on having more time to gather evidence and prepare our response. If Nathan was ready to file for divorce immediately, we needed to adjust our timeline accordingly. How much time do we have? I asked Daniela during an emergency consultation that afternoon. If Nathan files first, he gets to control the narrative and the initial terms, she explained. But if we file first, we can frame the case around his fraud and deception from the beginning. The question is whether you're ready to go public with what you know. I thought about the hotel project, my staff, my clients, the professional reputation I'd spent years building. Divorce proceedings would inevitably become public record, and the details of Nathan's deception would likely attract media attention. The successful designer whose husband had systematically defrauded her wasn't exactly the image I'd envisioned for my business. But the alternative was worse. Allowing Nathan to control the divorce proceedings would mean fighting from a defensive position, trying to prove my innocence rather than exposing his guilt. If I was going to fight back, it needed to be on my terms, using the evidence I'd gathered to maximum advantage. I'm ready, I told Daniela, my voice carrying more conviction than I felt. Let's file first. That night, Nathan called at his usual time, completely unaware that his carefully constructed timeline was about to be shattered. He chatted about his fictional day, described a business lunch that had never happened, and made plans for our future that he had no intention of honoring. I've been thinking about taking a long weekend when I get back, he said. Maybe we could go to that little bed and breakfast on the coast you're always talking about. Spend some quality time together, reconnect after this long separation. That sounds perfect, I replied, my voice warm with false enthusiasm. I'll start looking at dates. I can't wait to have you home. Soon, Nathan promised. Very soon. After we hung up, I walked through our house one final time as Nathan's wife. knowing that by tomorrow everything would be different. The divorce papers would be filed, Nathan's deception would be exposed, and the life we'd built together would officially begin its dissolution. Standing in the bedroom we'd shared for 6 years, looking at the empty space where Nathan's belongings used to be, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For months, I'd been living in a fiction created by someone else, playing a role in a story whose ending had been predetermined without my knowledge. Tomorrow, I would begin writing my own ending. The courthouse steps felt surreal beneath my feet as I walked toward the entrance at 8:30 in the morning, divorce papers tucked securely in my briefcase alongside months of evidence documenting Nathan's systematic deception. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and I pulled my coat tighter as I climbed toward a future I'd never imagined choosing. Daniela met me in the lobby, her professional composure providing stability in what felt like a completely unmoored moment. "Remember, this is just the beginning," she said as we walked toward the filing office. "Once these papers are submitted, Nathan will be served within 24 hours. After that, everything changes." The clerk who processed our filing was efficiently impersonal, stamping documents and collecting fees with the mechanical precision of someone who handled life-altering moments as routine paperwork. Within 15 minutes, my marriage to Nathan officially became a legal proceeding, complete with case numbers and court dates that would determine how the next chapter of my life unfolded. "The process server will deliver Nathan's copy this afternoon," Daniela explained as we left the courthouse. "I've arranged for service at the Bend address," Helen confirmed. "Nathan will receive the papers along with copies of all the financial evidence we've compiled." The thought of Nathan opening an envelope to discover that his carefully orchestrated deception had been completely exposed sent a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction through my chest. For months, he'd controlled every aspect of our interaction, manipulating my emotions and expectations while systematically stealing our shared assets. In a few hours, that dynamic would shift permanently. I drove to the hotel project, needing the familiar rhythm of work to anchor me while I waited for Nathan's world to explode. The renovation had reached the stage where individual rooms were taking their final shape, each space transformed from decades of neglect into something that honored the building's history while embracing contemporary luxury. Marcus found me in the presidential suite, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of downtown Portland and the mountains beyond. "You look like someone who just made a major life decision," he observed, his voice carrying the gentle concern that had characterized our working relationship. "Something like that," I replied, not ready to share the details but grateful for his perceptive understanding. Sometimes you reach a point where staying in a bad situation becomes more difficult than facing the uncertainty of change. "Well, whatever's happening in your personal life, don't let it overshadow what you've accomplished here," Marcus said, gesturing at the transformed space around us. "This project is going to establish you as one of the premier designers in the Pacific Northwest. Don't lose sight of that achievement." His words reminded me of something I'd been trying not to think about: what Nathan's theft and deception meant for my business reputation. The hotel project represented my biggest professional achievement, but it had also required significant personal financial investment. If Nathan's actions had damaged my credit or created hidden debts, my ability to complete future projects could be compromised. I spent the morning reviewing progress with my design team, checking installation details and approving final fixture selections. The work provided a welcome distraction from constantly checking my phone, waiting for news from Daniela about Nathan's reaction to being served with divorce papers. Sarah Kim, my project coordinator, noticed my distraction during our team meeting. "Are you feeling okay, Claire? You seem a bit scattered today, which isn't like you at all." "Just some personal stuff," I said, which was becoming my standard response to concerned colleagues. Nothing that affects the project timeline. But internally, I was counting the hours until Nathan received the papers that would shatter his comfortable deception. Helen had confirmed that he and Isabel maintained a regular routine, usually arriving home from their respective workdays around 5 o'clock. The process server was scheduled to deliver the documents at 6, ensuring Nathan would be home to receive them personally. At 3:30, my phone rang with Nathan's name on the caller ID. For a moment, I considered not answering, letting him go to voicemail while I processed the significance of his calling hours earlier than usual. But curiosity won out, and I accepted the call. "Claire, hi," Nathan said, his voice carrying an odd tension I'd never heard before. "I was wondering if we could talk tonight. I know it's not our usual time, but something's come up with the Austin project that I need to discuss with you." The timing was too coincidental to be accidental. Nathan must have somehow learned about the divorce filing, though I couldn't imagine how. Process servers were trained to be discreet, and the papers weren't scheduled for delivery for another 2.5 hours. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Is everything all right? You sound stressed." "It's complicated," Nathan said, which was the first honest thing he'd told me in months. "There are some developments here that might affect our timeline for the project completion. I want to make sure you're prepared for some potential changes." Changes. The word felt loaded with meaning I couldn't yet decipher. Nathan was clearly preparing to modify his story somehow, possibly accelerating his planned revelation or adjusting his exit strategy in response to information I didn't have. "What kind of changes?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he planned to navigate whatever crisis had prompted this unexpected call. "I'd rather explain everything properly when we talk tonight," Nathan replied. "Can you be available around 7? I know it's earlier than usual, but this really can't wait." I agreed to the earlier call time, then immediately contacted Daniela to report Nathan's unusual behavior. "He knows something," I told her. "The question is how much and how he found out." "I'll check with Helen to see if there's been any change in his routine or if anyone's been asking questions in Bend," Daniela replied. "But Claire, this might actually work in our favor. If Nathan's feeling pressured to reveal his deception early, he might make mistakes we can use against him." The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness, each hour bringing me closer to a conversation that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my marriage. I tried to focus on work, reviewing material samples and approving color schemes, but my mind kept drifting to the script Nathan might be preparing for our 7 o'clock call. At 6:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Package delivered." Target appeared shocked and immediately called someone on his personal cell. Looked like he was arguing. Stayed outside for 20 minutes before going inside. Nathan now knew that his elaborate deception had been discovered, that his systematic theft had been documented, and that his plan to divorce me on his terms had been preempted. He also knew that I'd been investigating him for weeks, while pretending to believe his stories about Austin. The balance of power in our relationship had shifted irrevocably. At exactly 7 o'clock, my phone rang. Nathan's voice when I answered was completely different from the confident, controlling tone he'd maintained throughout his fictional Austin adventure. He sounded deflated, uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Claire, we need to talk," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've received some legal documents today that I think we should discuss." The understatement was almost comical. Nathan had received a comprehensive filing that exposed every aspect of his deception, documented his theft of our shared assets, and included photographic evidence of his relationship with Isabel. Describing it as some legal documents was like calling a hurricane a light breeze. "What kind of legal documents?" I asked, maintaining the pretense of ignorance while secretly recording our conversation. "Divorce papers," Nathan said, the words seeming to catch in his throat, "filed by your attorney, along with some very detailed financial allegations." I let the silence stretch between us, forcing Nathan to fill the void with explanations I was curious to hear. How would he try to justify the unjustifiable? What story would he construct to explain away months of systematic deception and theft? "Claire, I know how this must look," Nathan continued, his voice gaining strength as he found his footing in familiar territory, crafting narratives to manage difficult situations. "But there are things about my situation here in Austin that I haven't been able to explain. Complications that made it impossible for me to be completely honest with you." Complications. Nathan was attempting to frame his affair and financial theft as unfortunate circumstances, rather than deliberate choices. I found myself almost impressed by his ability to begin constructing a new fiction, even as his previous lies crumbled around him. "What kind of complications?" I asked, genuinely interested in hearing his explanation. "The business expansion has been more challenging than I anticipated," Nathan said, his voice taking on the earnest tone he used when trying to convince clients to trust his recommendations. There were some cash flow issues that required immediate attention, and I had to make some difficult decisions about how to keep the project moving forward. Cash flow issues. Nathan was describing his theft of our joint savings as a business decision, reframing his systematic deception as professional necessity. The audacity was breathtaking, even by Nathan's standards. I don't understand, I said, playing the confused wife while taking notes on his evolving story. What does your business cash flow have to do with divorce papers? There's more, Nathan said, his voice dropping to barely audible. I've been working with a local real estate agent here who's been helping me find suitable office space. Our professional relationship has developed into something more personal, and I realize that's created a conflict of interest that affects our marriage. A conflict of interest. Nathan was describing his affair with Isabel as a professional complication that had inadvertently evolved into a personal problem. He was still avoiding responsibility, still trying to present himself as someone who'd found himself in an unfortunate situation, rather than someone who deliberately orchestrated a complex deception. Are you saying you're having an affair? I asked, my voice carefully modulated to sound hurt but not accusatory. I'm saying the situation has become complicated in ways I never intended, Nathan replied, his lawyer speak betraying years of practice in avoiding direct admissions of guilt. And I think we need to discuss how to move forward in a way that's fair to both of us. Fair to both of us. Nathan was positioning himself as a reasonable party seeking an equitable solution, conveniently ignoring that he'd spent months systematically stealing our assets and planning to leave me financially ruined. His ability to reframe his actions as reasonable and justified was genuinely impressive in its brazenness. Nathan, I said, allowing emotion to creep into my voice, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you living with another woman? Have you been using our money to finance a relationship with someone else? The directness of my question seemed to catch Nathan off guard. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably calculating how much truth he could afford to admit while maintaining some version of his preferred narrative. Yes, he said finally, the word carrying the weight of months of deception. I've been living with Isabel in Bend. The Austin story was a way to give us both time to figure out how to handle the situation responsibly. Responsibly. Nathan was describing his elaborate deception as a responsible approach to managing our divorce, as if lying to me for months while stealing our money represented mature conflict resolution. How long? I asked, though I already knew the answer from Helen's investigation. 8 months, Nathan admitted, since February. February. Nathan had been living with another woman since February, while continuing to share our bed, eat meals I prepared, and discuss our future plans as if they had any meaning. The timeline made every intimate moment we'd shared since then feel like a violation, every conversation about our future feel like sadistic manipulation. And the money? I pressed, wanting to hear him admit to the financial theft directly. I used some of our savings to help establish the new living situation, Nathan said, his euphemisms becoming more elaborate as the conversation continued. I know I should have discussed it with you first, but I was trying to manage a very complicated transition. Some of our savings. Nathan had stolen nearly $80,000 from our joint accounts, damaged my credit by opening cards in my name, and used my money to buy a house with another woman. Describing this as using, quote, some of our savings was like describing the Titanic disaster as a minor shipping delay. How much money, Nathan? I asked, my voice hardening despite my efforts to maintain composure. The details are complicated, Nathan replied, falling back on vagueness when direct lies became impossible to maintain. But I want you to know that I've been working with an attorney to make sure any divorce settlement is fair to both parties. Fair to both parties. Nathan was referring to the divorce papers Helen had discovered, the documents designed to leave me with nothing while protecting all the assets he'd stolen. His definition of fairness was as twisted as everything else about his approach to ending our marriage. Nathan, I said, dropping the pretense of ignorance. I know about the house in Bend. I know about Isabel. I know about the fake Austin story, the non-existent office, the business trips that never happened. I know about all of it. The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if Nathan had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a defeat I'd never heard before. How long have you known? He asked, Long enough, I replied. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to protect myself legally. Long enough to make sure your version of a fair settlement doesn't leave me bankrupt while you start fresh with my money. Claire, I never wanted it to happen this way, Nathan said, his voice taking on a pleading quality that might have moved me months earlier. I was trying to find a way to end our marriage without destroying either of our lives. Nathan had spent months systematically dismantling my financial security, damaging my credit, and planning to trick me into signing away my rights in our divorce. His concern for my well-being was as fictional as his Austin business trip. You were trying to find a way to steal everything and leave me with nothing, I corrected. The divorce papers you prepared would have accomplished exactly that. Those were just preliminary documents, Nathan protested. Starting points for negotiation. I would never have actually left you with nothing. The lie was so blatant, it was almost insulting. The divorce papers had been carefully crafted by experienced attorneys to maximize Nathan's financial position, while minimizing mine. They weren't starting points for negotiation. They were the endgame Nathan had been working toward for months. Nathan, I said, my voice carrying the finality of a closing door. The time for negotiations and explanations is over. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences. My attorney will be in touch with yours to discuss the actual terms of our divorce. Claire, please, Nathan said, panic finally entering his voice as he realized his careful plans had completely collapsed. We can work this out. We've been together for 6 years. That has to mean something. 6 years. Nathan was appealing to the history of our relationship, while conveniently ignoring that he'd been systematically betraying me for a significant portion of that time. The marriage he was asking me to consider preserving had been a fiction for at least the past 18 months. It did mean something, I replied, until you decided it meant nothing. I hung up before Nathan could respond, sitting in the silence of my office while the weight of officially ending my marriage settled around me. The conversation had confirmed everything Helen's investigation had revealed while adding new layers to Nathan's deception. Even when caught red-handed, he'd continued lying, minimizing, and trying to manipulate the narrative in his favor. My phone immediately began ringing again, Nathan calling back, but I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he wanted to say now, whatever final appeals or threats or explanations he might offer, I wasn't interested in hearing them. The time for conversations had ended, along with our marriage. Over the next hour, Nathan left 6 voicemail messages, each one revealing a different emotional stage of his processing. The first was angry, accusing me of overreacting and making the situation worse than it needed to be. The second was bargaining, offering to return some of the money and end his relationship with Isabel. The third was desperate, claiming he'd made terrible mistakes but still loved me. The progression was predictable and ultimately meaningless. Nathan was cycling through emotional responses while looking for the combination that might restore his control over the situation. But his time for manipulating my emotions had ended the moment I discovered his secret phone and the text messages that revealed his true priorities. Daniela called just as I was preparing to leave the office. How did he handle the news? She asked. About as well as you'd expect, I replied. Lots of lies, minimizing, trying to reframe everything as unfortunate circumstances rather than deliberate choices. Even when confronted with evidence, he kept trying to manage the narrative. That's actually helpful for our case, Daniela explained. Nathan's inability to take responsibility for his actions will work against him in court. Judges don't appreciate parties who try to manipulate proceedings with false narratives. The next few days passed in a blur of legal preparation and emotional processing. Nathan's attorney contacted Daniela to request a settlement conference, hoping to resolve the divorce without a public trial that would expose the details of Nathan's deception. But the terms they proposed were barely better than Nathan's original plan. I would receive a small portion of our joint assets, while Nathan kept the house in Bend and the majority of our shared investments. They're still trying to negotiate from a position of strength, Daniela explained during our strategy meeting. Nathan's lawyer is hoping you'll accept a small settlement to avoid the publicity and emotional toll of a contested divorce. But I'd moved beyond caring about publicity or emotional toll. Nathan had counted on my desire to avoid conflict, my preference for privacy, my willingness to accept less than I deserved to maintain the appearance of amicable separation. He'd built his entire strategy around the assumption that I would prioritize peace over justice. "I want everything I'm entitled to," I told Daniela. "The house, half of all assets, compensation for the money he stole, and coverage of all legal fees." If Nathan wanted to avoid a public trial, he should have thought about that before committing fraud. The hotel project provided a welcome distraction from the legal complexities of my divorce. The grand reopening was scheduled for December, and every detail had to be perfect. Food and beverage operations were being tested, staff was being trained, and the marketing campaign was generating significant media interest. Marcus had become more than a contractor during the project. He'd become a friend whose steady presence provided stability during the chaos of my personal life. He never asked directly about my situation, but I could see the concern in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. "Whatever's happening in your personal life," he said during one of our final walkthroughs, "don't let it overshadow what you've accomplished here. This project is going to change everything for your business." His words proved prophetic when Architectural Digest called to request a feature story about the hotel renovation. The magazine had seen photos of the project on social media and wanted to showcase it as an example of successful historic preservation combined with contemporary luxury. "This could put Dawson Design Studio on the national map," the editor explained during our phone conversation. "We're particularly interested in how you balanced historical authenticity with modern functionality." The feature would include a multi-page spread with professional photography, establishing me as a designer capable of handling major institutional projects. It was exactly the kind of recognition that could transform my boutique firm into a nationally recognized brand. But the timing was complicated by my ongoing divorce proceedings. Nathan's attorney had filed motions requesting portions of my business assets, claiming that his emotional and financial support during our marriage entitled him to a share of my professional success. The Architectural Digest feature would only increase the perceived value of my business, potentially making Nathan's claims more expensive to resolve. "Let him try," Daniela said when I shared my concerns. "Nathan's own actions have proven he had no involvement in your business success. His affair timeline coincides exactly with your biggest professional achievements. If anything, the evidence suggests you succeeded despite his betrayal, not because of his support." The irony wasn't lost on me that Nathan's deception had inadvertently freed me to focus entirely on my career. While he'd been distracted by his relationship with Isabel, I'd been building the foundation for my biggest professional breakthrough. His betrayal had hurt me personally, but professionally it had eliminated the distraction of trying to maintain a marriage with someone who didn't value it. As November arrived with its characteristic Pacific Northwest rain, my divorce case moved toward resolution. Nathan's initial confidence had given way to increasingly desperate attempts to avoid the full consequences of his actions. His attorney filed motion after motion, requesting delays, demanding mediation, claiming his client was willing to make concessions. But I was no longer interested in Nathan's willingness to negotiate. He'd had months to demonstrate honesty, integrity, and respect for our marriage. Instead, he'd chosen deception, theft, and betrayal. The time for showing mercy to someone who'd shown me none had passed. The final settlement conference was scheduled for the week before Thanksgiving, with a trial date set for early December if no agreement could be reached. Nathan would have one last opportunity to accept responsibility for his actions and agree to fair terms. If he refused, he would face the full exposure of a public trial that would document every aspect of his deception. Standing in the hotel's lobby as the final fixtures were installed, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the renovation project. The woman who'd trusted Nathan's promises and believed his lies was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the people closest to you are the most capable of betrayal. But I'd also learned that surviving betrayal was possible, that rebuilding was not only feasible but could lead to something stronger than what had been destroyed. Nathan had tried to steal my money, my security, and my future. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the motivation to create something better than anything we'd ever built together. The settlement conference took place in a sterile conference room on the 15th floor of a downtown Portland office building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city where I'd built my business while Nathan had been dismantling our marriage. Daniela sat beside me, our carefully organized evidence files spread across the polished table like a roadmap of betrayal documented in spreadsheets and bank statements. Nathan arrived 10 minutes late, accompanied by his attorney and looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. The confident, charming husband I'd known for 6 years had been replaced by someone who kept glancing at the door as if planning an escape route. Isabel wasn't with him, which surprised me until I realized that bringing his girlfriend to his divorce settlement would have been tactically disastrous even by Nathan's standards. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, opened the proceedings with an offer that was clearly designed to test my resolve. Nathan would return $30,000 of the stolen funds, allow me to keep the Portland house, and provide a small monthly payment for 2 years. In exchange, I would waive all claims to his business assets, accept responsibility for half our joint debts, and sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the circumstances of our divorce. That's generous considering the disputed nature of some of these financial claims, Nathan's lawyer said, her tone suggesting she expected gratitude rather than negotiation. Daniela responded with a counteroffer that laid out exactly what we considered fair. Complete return of all stolen funds, half of all marital assets including the Bend house, reimbursement for damaged credit, coverage of all legal fees, and no non-disclosure agreement whatsoever. Nathan's face went pale as she detailed each demand, his carefully constructed exit strategy crumbling in real time. Those terms are completely unreasonable, his attorney protested. My client made some poor financial decisions, but characterizing them as theft is inflammatory and inaccurate. Your client systematically drained joint accounts to purchase a house with another woman while lying to his wife about his whereabouts for 5 months, Daniela replied calmly. If you have a different word for that behavior, I'd be interested to hear it. The back and forth continued for 2 hours, with Nathan's team gradually conceding points while still trying to minimize his responsibility. They acknowledged the financial transfers, but claimed they were business investments. They admitted the relationship with Isabel, but insisted it had developed organically rather than being planned. They confirmed the false Austin story but characterized it as a misguided attempt to protect everyone involved. Through it all, Nathan remained largely silent, occasionally whispering to his attorney but never making eye contact with me. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and charmed investors couldn't bring himself to face the wife he'd spent months deceiving. His discomfort was obvious, and I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: pity. During a break in negotiations, Nathan approached me in the hallway while our attorneys discussed technical details. He looked exhausted, older than his 34 years, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. Claire, I know you probably don't believe this, but I never wanted to hurt you, he said, his voice carrying a vulnerability I hadn't heard since the early days of our relationship. Everything just got so complicated, and I didn't know how to fix it without making things worse. You could have told me the truth, I replied, studying his face for any sign of genuine remorse. At any point during the past 8 months, you could have been honest about what was happening. I was scared, Nathan admitted, the confession seeming to surprise him as much as it surprised me. Scared of losing you, scared of admitting I'd failed, scared of facing the consequences of the choices I'd made. The lies just kept building on themselves until I couldn't see a way out. It was the first time Nathan had acknowledged responsibility for his actions without trying to justify or minimize them. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd fallen in love with, someone capable of vulnerability and self-reflection. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the reality of everything he'd done while wearing the mask of that better version of himself. I hope you find happiness with Isabel, I said, meaning it more than I'd expected to. But that doesn't change what you owe me for the way you chose to end our marriage. Nathan nodded, understanding that my personal forgiveness didn't translate to legal absolution. He'd made choices that had consequences beyond our emotional relationship, and those consequences couldn't be erased by apologies or explanations. The negotiations resumed after lunch with Nathan's team presenting a significantly improved offer. They would return $60,000 of the stolen funds, split the Bend house equity, and cover my legal fees. It was closer to fair, but still left me absorbing the financial damage Nathan had inflicted while protecting most of his assets. We're prepared to walk away and go to trial, Daniela told them when they pressed for my acceptance. The evidence strongly favors our client, and a public trial would expose details that might be uncomfortable for your client's business reputation. The threat of public exposure was the leverage we'd been saving for this moment. Nathan's consulting business, however fictional its current state, depended on his reputation for trustworthiness and reliability. A divorce trial documenting his systematic deception would make it nearly impossible for him to rebuild his professional credibility. Nathan's attorney requested a private consultation with her client, and they huddled in whispered conversation for 20 minutes while Daniela and I reviewed our trial preparation. When they returned, Nathan looked resigned to accepting terms that would actually compensate me fairly for his betrayal. The final settlement required Nathan to return the full $80,000 he'd stolen, transfer his share of the Bend house to me, assume responsibility for all credit card debt he'd accumulated, and pay my legal fees. In return, I would waive claims to his business assets and allow him to keep personal property he'd acquired before our marriage. This is acceptable, I told Daniela after reviewing the terms. It wasn't everything I could have demanded, but it was fair compensation that would allow me to rebuild my financial security while ensuring Nathan faced real consequences for his choices. The agreement was finalized just before Thanksgiving, with asset transfers scheduled to complete by year-end. Nathan would have to sell the Bend house to meet his financial obligations, effectively ending his romantic paradise with Isabel, and forcing them to find new accommodations with significantly reduced resources. As I walked out of the law office for the final time, carrying copies of documents that officially ended my marriage, I felt a strange combination of relief and sadness. Relief that the legal battle was over, that my financial security was protected, that I could finally move forward without looking over my shoulder, but also sadness for the loss of the future Nathan and I had planned together, even though that future had been built on foundations I hadn't known were fictional. The hotel's grand reopening took place 3 weeks before Christmas, with an invitation-only event that showcased every detail of the renovation. Local media covered the party extensively, praising the successful balance of historical preservation and contemporary luxury. The mayor attended, along with prominent business leaders and society figures who represented the kind of clientele the hotel hoped to attract. I wore a midnight blue dress that had been hanging in my closet since before Nathan left for his fictional Austin trip, feeling like a completely different person than the woman who'd originally selected it. The confident designer who moved through the party, discussing the renovation details with guests and photographers, bore little resemblance to the wife who'd believed her husband's elaborate lies just months earlier. Marcus found me on the rooftop terrace as the party wound down, Portland's city lights twinkling below us like earthbound stars. "You should be proud," he said, gesturing at the transformed hotel around us. This project will be remembered as the moment Dawson Design Studio became a major player in the industry. He was right. The Architectural Digest feature had already generated inquiries from potential clients in Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. My business calendar for the following year was filling with projects that would have been impossible to secure before the hotel renovation demonstrated my capabilities on a major scale. "It's funny," I told Marcus, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Nathan's betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it also forced me to focus entirely on my work. If he hadn't been lying about everything, I might not have thrown myself into this project with the same intensity. Sometimes the worst experiences prepare us for the best opportunities, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd navigated his own share of personal and professional challenges. The question is what you do with the opportunities when they come. I spent the holidays in my new apartment, a converted loft in Portland's Pearl District, that reflected my aesthetic preferences without any compromise or negotiation. The space was entirely mine, furnished with pieces I'd selected, decorated with art that spoke to me personally, organized according to my own priorities and preferences. Christmas morning brought a message from Nathan that I debated reading for several minutes before curiosity won out. "I hope you find the happiness you deserve," it said. "Thank you for not destroying me completely when you had every right to do so." The message was typical Nathan, acknowledging wrongdoing while simultaneously positioning himself as grateful for my restraint, rather than ashamed of his actions. But I found myself appreciating the sentiment anyway, recognizing it as probably the closest thing to genuine accountability I would ever receive from him. New Year's Eve arrived with an invitation to a party at the hotel, celebrating both the successful reopening and the start of what management hoped would be a profitable year. I attended briefly, enjoying the chance to see the spaces I'd designed filled with happy guests, then returned home to my apartment to ring in the new year quietly. At midnight, standing on my balcony with a glass of champagne and the city spread out below me, I reflected on the transformation the past year had brought. The naive wife who'd trusted her husband's promises had been replaced by a woman who understood that security came from personal strength rather than partnership dependency. The business expanded rapidly in the new year, requiring me to hire additional staff and consider opening a second office to handle projects outside Portland. The hotel renovation had established my reputation as a designer capable of managing complex, high-stakes projects, and the referrals began flowing from satisfied clients to their networks of affluent friends. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Nathan and Isabel had moved to a rental apartment in Bend after selling the house to meet his divorce obligations. His consulting business had struggled to recover from the reputational damage of the divorce proceedings, though he'd managed to secure some smaller contracts that kept him financially afloat. Part of me wondered if Isabel had known about Nathan's deception from the beginning, or if she'd been another victim of his manipulation. The photos Helen had shown me suggested genuine happiness in their relationship, but I'd learned that Nathan was exceptionally skilled at projecting whatever emotions served his purposes. Spring brought the Architectural Digest feature, with a 6-page spread showcasing the hotel renovation alongside an interview about my design philosophy and business approach. The magazine positioned me as an emerging talent worth watching, someone who understood how to honor architectural history while creating spaces for contemporary life. The feature generated immediate interest from developers and hotel groups across the country, with inquiries about projects and markets I'd only dreamed of entering. My assistant, now essential for managing the increased workload, started keeping a waiting list for potential clients whose timelines couldn't accommodate our packed schedule. On a warm May evening, exactly 1 year after Nathan had left for his supposed Austin business trip, I found myself working late in my office, reviewing proposals for a luxury resort renovation in Napa Valley. The project would be even larger than the Portland hotel, with a budget that would allow for the kind of custom details that separated exceptional work from merely competent execution. My phone rang with a call from an unknown number, and I considered letting it go to voicemail before deciding to answer. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, professional, belonging to someone who introduced herself as a reporter for a national business magazine. "I'm working on a story about women entrepreneurs who've overcome personal challenges to build successful businesses," she explained. "Your name came up several times during my research, and I was hoping you might be interested in participating." The interview request represented an opportunity to share my story on my own terms, to discuss the intersection of personal resilience and professional achievement without sensationalizing the details of Nathan's betrayal. After a year of rebuilding, I felt ready to speak publicly about the experience that had ultimately led to my greatest professional success. "I'd be interested in learning more about the article," I told the reporter, scheduling a follow-up conversation for the next week. As I hung up the phone and returned to reviewing project proposals, I realized that Nathan's elaborate deception had accomplished something he'd never intended. His attempts to manipulate and control me had ultimately freed me to discover capabilities I might never have developed within the constraints of our marriage. The woman who'd believed his Austin story and trusted his promises was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important relationship in life was the one you built with yourself. Nathan had tried to steal my money, my security, and my future. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me the motivation to create something far better than anything we'd ever shared. The city lights sparkled beyond my office windows as I made notes on the Napa Valley proposal, already envisioning the possibilities for transforming another historic property into something extraordinary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something beautiful from the raw materials of imagination and determination. I'd learned that betrayal could be survived, that trust could be rebuilt selectively, and that sometimes the end of one's story was simply the beginning of a better one. Nathan's 5-month business trip had lasted exactly as long as it took me to discover who I could become when I stopped trying to be who someone else needed me to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.